I'm speaking today with Dr. Ray Huang. He is head of Asia and principal engineer for Exponent. Dr. Huang, welcome.
Welcome. Glad to be here.
We're going to be talking about supply chain resumption. That seems to be the topic on everybody's mind these days, assuming that we are indeed coming out of the pandemic and getting to a point where we can even have that discussion. What do you think is needed to get factories up and running back to their full potential?
So there's a couple things that we have seen over the past couple months. I think we have come a long way from being completely closed off without any means of national transportation or even realistic schedule to reopen. This was earlier this year, shortly after Chinese New Year's, early spring timeframe. Now we are fully functional, operational, and the infrastructure and systems are back online. Without significant risk of outbreaks, because that was one of the biggest things that people are concerned about. There's been some pockets here and there, but most recently, for example, Singapore just got out of their circuit breaker, and we are embracing the light towards the end of the tunnel. And talking and other regions and countries in Asia are also experiencing the same thing. China, Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and other countries in Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question, one of the major themes we've seen from our perspective had been an increasing number of failures. And I'll elaborate. A number of failures, these could be quality related. These could be reliability related, for products that's being produced. They could be safety related, type of issues for products that eventually got to the customer's hands, or even issues with intellectual property transfer. And all these kind of lead to disputes. So one of the things that we want to make sure that a lot of the suppliers and manufacturers are aware of are ways, are whether if they are equipped to deal with these failures, either on the line, either after the products have gone out the factory, or working with the companies who are designing the product to make them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's especially tough right now because you do not, for example, China still has the travel restriction in place. So a lot of the US-based and EU-based engineers or staff or professionals are not able to be present on the floor with the folks in the factory to make things happen. So they need to think about how they can equip themselves to avoid this or to minimize these type of issues from happening.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me stop you for a moment and just get back to this issue of failures, because I'm trying to understand why that is happening. Are you saying that it is an unusual number compared with pre-pandemic, and across the board, there's so many different types of failures that you're talking about, but this is like an unusually high number happening right now?
It's not only just an unusually high number, but also a different type of failure.
Uh-huh.
Just to give a couple examples, recall that FDA published a list of face mask manufacturers in China, but very soon disqualified them due to the end product not meeting standards. There are, in fact, thousands of face mask manufacturers that was newly established just in the past couple months. And what happened was there are manufacturers who thought about, hey, this is a great opportunity, so I want to transfer that technology from my existing manufacturing line to something new. So without that experience, without that attention to details, without a good standard operating procedure, without the knowledge to operate the equipment, you may end up with these failures that had you stick with your original set of products, you would not have experienced that. So this is a different set of failures,
I see.
right? And
Yeah.
on top of the typical failures that you would see on manufacturing lines.
Yeah.
I think factories are getting better now, because in the beginning, a couple months ago, folks were still suffering from lack of raw materials, lack of staff. So we have come quite a long way from that.
Well, what kind of changes are we seeing inside those factories in terms of configuring the positions of the machines and where the people are, and for that matter, how many people there are and how much space there is between them? Are there changes being enacted in those factories right now, quite different from pre-pandemic?
I think there are different definitely cultural differences that accounts for some of the precautions and some of the practices that folks are taking in different parts of the world. I think for example, in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, they learned their lesson from SARS in 2003. So it experienced that, so they know. So it's kind of built in to their DNA on how to deal with these. So when companies set up these protocols and set up these rules, it becomes very easy to implement. Right?
Mhm.
And people just know, like it's as if they already know what to do.
But
Um, so
question is though, how radical is it? I mean, we hear some manufacturing facilities in the United States where the production lines are so close to one another that they've had to shut down every other one, thereby
right,
cutting their machine capability and their capacity in half. Is that happening in Asia as well?
some yes,
Yeah.
for sure. I think the capacity is definitely an issue that was deeply impacted by these safety precautions. We even see, if you see some pictures that are on the internet, you see folks in the cafeteria having these acrylic dividers between
Right.
them, right,
Yeah.
for the workers. So it's rather it's radical in the sense that the companies and government agency are very proactive in pushing these out. Obviously, in the beginning, it's quote unquote rather strict, but I think now when the number of cases have gone down and the rate of spread is much lower, I think these practices have kind of slowly gone away.
Yeah. What impact is it having on productivity and on the capacity of production? I imagine that they're not at full levels of production because of this, or at least temporarily, right?
I think right now it's June. If we were talking about back in February, March timeframe, like I said earlier, shortly after Chinese New Year, the productivity was rather low. Folks have their hands tied because they're not able to come back. There's nothing to work on. And in some cases, I think in March, April timeframe, there's a big wave of orders being canceled because of the pandemic affecting other parts of the world. But I think right now, folks are very much back online. The productivity is good. But now productivity is one thing, but the yield and how good these products that are being made are is another parameters that has to be addressed.
Yeah. Is there also a concern, though, that as they ramp up production at these plants and consumer demand doesn't come back commensurate with that level of production, you're going to have a lot of product out there that needs a place to be stored in the meantime? I hear that a lot of distribution centers and warehouses are already full. Where is this stuff going to go?
There are different strategies. There are different strategies for these things to for folks to manage these resources and even these products. So for some suppliers, it's actually cheaper. For some companies, it's actually cheaper to dispose of the product.
Hmm.
We've heard stories of folks just burning these products, then to return them, then to repurpose them, then to return them to where they come from. So these are some drastic measures, but I think what we're seeing, what companies are doing, is not only addressing the products that are already stocked and cannot be sold, but they have to think about other things post pandemic. What do people care about? What do they want to do? What do they want to make? For example, food. You can't just sell food without proper packaging and making people feel like that these food are safe, without without the virus. And there are some additional packaging requirements as well, that make a particular product more attractive than what they used to be, pre-pandemic.
Hmm. Well, are we eventually just headed back toward the situation as it stood before with regard to where production is happening? Or do you think that this is going to lead to some permanent resourcing, whether other parts of Asia, whether nearshoring to the United States, whether domestically within the United States? Do you think there's going to be a shuffle and a change in actual sourcing patterns as a result of this?
Most definitely. I think some of the people that we work with are revisiting their strategies, in terms of diversification, where their source of products, because one of the examples that I always used was earlier this year. We were working with a tire company. And what happened was, because of their centralized supplier management logistics, they were negotiating the raw materials and sources from one single locations. So they have suppliers all over the world. But because of this, when the outbreak occurred, they were not able to deploy. They were not able to kind of diversify quick enough to find raw materials locally, because some of the major sources have been cut off. So they're thinking, well, instead of having one single location that manages all the different locations, why don't I localize, give the local agencies a little bit more autonomy, so they can source the materials locally. They're able to negotiate the prices locally. They have a little bit more flexibility. So if one of the sources gets cut off, they still have other options. So it's diversifying the risk, and diversifying and minimizing these interruptions.
Yeah, and including, I guess, some domestic sourcing. Maybe not a wide-scale return of all manufacturing back to this hemisphere, but still some emphasis on domestic sourcing.
Well, most definitely.
Yeah.
So, right, it's not just one location. It's going to be either domestic, or just folks are finding creative ways to find these resources, either domestically or globally.
Yeah. Well, interesting changes going on, and it's good to see that at least some of it is coming back, but who knows where it's going to go. But thank you so much, Dr. Ray Huang, for giving us an insight into into where we are at this point in time. Thanks very much for being with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rob.